The sun had barely risen when the shouting began. Zahara stood in the center of the compound, her bare feet pressed into the red earth still cool from the night. She had not slept, not after the argument that tore through the house like a storm. Her stepmother's voice, sharp as a broken calabash, still echoed inside her mind. "Take your things and leave. You bring nothing but misfortune." Her father said nothing then. He said nothing now. The villagers were gathering, pretending not to stare. Zahara kept her eyes down, gripping the small woven bag that held the only possessions they allowed her to keep: a tattered wrapper from her late mother, a half-burned journal, and a single brass hairpin shaped like a flame. Her mother's heirloom. Her father stood before her, tall, silent, heavy with a shame he refused to confess. His new wife, Adissa, stood beside him with smug triumph gleaming in her eyes. "This house is for those who bring honor," Adissa declared loudly, ensuring every ear heard her. "Not for girls who speak lies." Zahara's stomach tightened. What? No, truths. The truth she had dared to speak last night. The truth Adissa would do anything to bury. Zahara inhaled slowly. "Baba," she whispered, trying one last time, "you heard what I said. You know it's true." A muscle twitched in the old man's jaw. For a moment she thought he would break, would finally speak up, defend her, stop the madness. But then his eyes hardened. "You will not challenge my wife in my home," he said. The words felt like stones hitting her chest. "Go. And do not return." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Zahara felt her throat close, but she forced herself to nod. There was nothing left to say. Not when her own father chose silence to protect a lie. She turned toward the village gates. But Adissa's voice rose again, sweet as rotten fruit. "Wait." Zahara paused. Her stepmother stepped forward, an exaggerated sadness on her face. "Before you leave, I have a reminder for you." She held up a small clay bowl and emptied it on Zahara's feet. Ashes, cold, dead gray. A gasp tore through the watching crowd. Zahara stared at the ashes swirling around her toes, sticking to her skin. A curse. A humiliation. A final attempt to reduce her to nothing. Adissa smiled. "Let everyone remember, this girl brought ashes into this house. And ashes are all she will ever be." The villagers exchanged glances. Some pitied. A few smirked. Most stayed silent. Zahara raised her head slowly. For the first time, her eyes did not hold fear. "Remember what you've done," she whispered. Adissa's smile twitched. Zahara turned and walked away. She wandered for hours, past fields, past thorny bushes, past everything she once knew. Heat hammered her shoulders, but she didn't stop until she reached the old fig tree at the edge of the eastern hills, her mother's favorite place. There finally she let her knees buckle. She did not cry. She burned. The memory of last night erupted in her mind. She had found Adissa in the dead of night, whispering to a masked stranger in the courtyard, trading charms wrapped in dark cloth, the kind used in forbidden rituals. Her mother's name had been spoken, and Zahara had understood everything. Her stepmother hadn't just hated her mother. She had feared her. Feared the fire gift she carried. Feared that Zahara would inherit it. Zahara closed her eyes, breathing hard. Her mother used to say the women in their lineage carried fire in their blood, not the kind that destroyed homes, but the kind that revealed truth. Flames bent toward them. Lamps brightened in their presence. They sensed lies like smoke in the air. Adissa must have known. Must have feared that Zahara had begun to sense her secrets, which she had. That was why she wanted her gone. Zahara opened her bag and removed the brass flame-shaped hairpin. She held it tightly until it warmed in her palm. A warmth that felt alive. "Mother," she whispered, "I don't know what to do." The wind shifted. A faint glow pulsed in the hairpin, so faint she thought her eyes were playing tricks. But the warmth remained. A spark? A sign? She didn't yet know. Night fell. The cold crept in. Zahara gathered dry leaves and driftwood, but the air was too damp to spark a flame. Her stomach grumbled. Her head spun. She had no food, no shelter, no one. Yet when she closed her eyes, she felt, not alone. She felt watched. Protected. A soft rustle behind the tree made her sit up. She wasn't afraid. Not anymore. She turned slowly, and found a firefly hovering in front of her face. Just one. Golden. Bright. Steady. It circled her once, twice, then drifted to the pile of damp wood. Zahara frowned. "It won't light," she whispered. The firefly pulsed brighter, then settled on a leaf. And suddenly, whoosh, a flame rose. Small, steady, impossible. Zahara inhaled sharply. The firelight reflected in her eyes, eyes that glowed as though remembering something ancient. The fire bent gently toward her. Not toward the wood. Toward her. Recognition. Her heartbeat quickened. A pressure filled her chest, warm and rising. She felt something inside her, something sleeping, begin to stir. "No," she whispered softly. "It can't be." She leaned closer. The flame leaned back. A truth hit her with the force of a storm. She wasn't cursed. She wasn't ash. She was fire. Her mother's gift had found her. It had awakened. That night, she sat by the flames, whispering everything she had held inside. Pain, fear, betrayal, all of it. The fire listened, bending, flickering, responding as if it understood every word. And in its glow, Zahara made a vow. "I will not be what they tried to bury," she said. "I will not disappear." Her voice trembled but did not break. "One day, they will speak my name with the fear they saved for shadows." Her hands tightened around the hairpin. "And they will know why." When dawn came, Zahara stood tall, renewed, steadier than she had ever felt. The ashes Adissa poured on her feet were gone. The shame had burned away during the night. A new name formed in her mind, one she wasn't ready to say aloud yet. A name born from fire. A name meant to be feared. She wrapped her mother's scarf around her shoulders, took her bag and walked toward the rising sun. Behind her, every flame in the small campfire leaned, not randomly, not with the wind, but in a graceful bow. Bowing to her. Zahara did not look back. But the fire watched her go. The storm did not arrive like storms normally do. There was no warning rumble, no shift in the scent of the air, no gathering of clouds on the horizon. Instead, the dustlands simply stopped breathing. The wind fell silent, the heat froze in place, and even the insects buried themselves as if hiding from something ancient. Lindiwe noticed it first while gathering thornwood. The hairs on her arms lifted. The air tasted metallic, like something old had been stirred awake. Sheeta looked up sharply from the campfire. "Inside," she whispered. "Now." But Lindiwe had already turned toward the horizon where a brown-gold wall was rising, too tall for any dust wind she had ever seen. It looked like the earth itself had lifted into the sky. "Sandstorm," someone shouted. The outcasts scrambled, tying their tents down, covering pots, shielding children. Dust storms here were violent, unforgiving. Many travelers had vanished in them. But this one felt alive. Lindiwe tried to run with the others, but a sudden gust slammed into her, throwing her to the ground. Sand scraped her face, filled her mouth, stung her eyes. She coughed and tried to crawl, but the wind lifted her like a leaf. "Lindiwe!" Sheeta screamed, reaching out. Their fingertips brushed. Then the storm swallowed Lindiwe whole. Inside the storm there was no up or down. No sound and yet every sound. No air and yet something warm filled her lungs. Colors flickered through the sand, gold, bronze, ember red. The storm spun around her as if she were at the center of a giant spinning drum. She tried to scream, but the wind stole her voice. Then she realized something impossible. Shapes moved in the dust. Not human. Not animal. Spirits. They emerged like glowing cinders dancing within the swirling darkness, bodies made of ash and ember, shifting in and out of form. Their eyes glowed like coals. They circled her, studying her with ancient patience. Lindiwe froze, heart pounding so loudly she thought the storm would hear it. The largest spirit drifted closer. Its form flickered, sometimes a woman, sometimes a towering silhouette, sometimes a figure made of smoke alone. It lifted what should have been a hand, hovering it above Lindiwe's cheek. The storm softened. A warm voice, layered like many voices speaking together, whispered, "Do not fear. We know your pain." Lindiwe tried to speak, but the wind filled her throat. Another spirit drifted behind her, smaller and flickering like a child made of fireflies. "You were cast out," it murmured. A figure shaped like an elder floated forward. But not forgotten. The largest spirit touched her palms. Heat pulsed through her skin. Not burning, not hurting, but awakening. Two glowing sigils seared themselves into her hands, ancient marks shaped like swirling winds and falling sand. Lindiwe gasped as the symbols glowed brighter, sinking beneath her skin, becoming part of her blood. The spirits rose together, their voices weaving into one single echo. "Become the one who sees what others fear to face. Become the wind that reveals truth. Become the dust that remembers." Lindiwe felt something inside her crack open. Something that had been locked away since the day Baresa cast her out. Tears streamed down her face, but they turned into tiny sparks before they could fall. Her heartbeat matched the pulse of the storm. The dust spiraled around her like it was bowing. The spirits circled faster, lifting her higher into the air. "Child of exile," they whispered. "Rise." And the storm obeyed. It lifted her gently upward until she felt weightless, as though the earth had released her from every burden she had carried. The entire sky flickered with ember light. Lindiwe opened her eyes, and she saw. She saw truths swirling through the storm like hidden threads. She saw lies floating like dark shapes. She saw secrets shaking like trapped shadows. She saw betrayal tracing paths through the dust. She could hear them too. A traitor's lie sounded like rattling bones. A coward's excuse rustled like dry leaves. And the guilty. Their shadows trembled violently, unable to hide. She clutched her marked palms, breath shaking. She was no longer just a girl banished. She was something else. The spirits faded, returning into the storm's heart. Their final whisper curled around her like warm wind. "You rise from dust. You rise for truth." Then the storm exhaled. Everything went white. When Lindiwe opened her eyes again, she lay on the ground near the camp. The storm had passed, leaving behind an eerie stillness. Fine dust sparkled on her skin like golden powder. Sheeta knelt beside her, face streaked with tears of fear and relief. Child, we thought the storm took you." Lindiwe sat up slowly. The world felt sharper. Voices whispered around her, secrets carried by the settling dust. "I'm different," she murmured, looking at her glowing palms. "I hear things." Sheeta pulled back, eyes wide with awe and fear. "What do you hear?" Lindiwe turned toward the desert. The dust spoke. The wind murmured. The shadows trembled. "I hear truth," she whispered. "And truth has been waiting." Sheeta stared at her as if staring at a miracle, or a prophecy. "The Dustlands have chosen you," she whispered. "Lindiwe, what did you become in that storm?" Lindiwe stood slowly, the sigils glowing faintly beneath her skin. She looked toward the distant village where Baresa lived, where lies ruled, where injustice walked freely. And the dust murmured. "Hungry, restless, ready." "I became the one they fear," she said softly. The wind lifted her braids. Shadows bowed. The Dustlands whispered her name like a promise. Lindiwe. The girl the storm had remade. The girl who walked with truth. The girl whose exile had awakened a force older than kings. And as the night fell over the wasteland, the dust rose again. Not in anger this time, but in recognition. Their keeper had awakened. The night began strangely still, as if the Dustlands were holding their breath. Lindiwe felt it before she understood it. The air thickened. The wind thinned. The sky smudged into a strange bronze. Even the outcasts who had lived their entire lives in the wasteland looked up with unease. Not fear, but recognition. Something old was waking. Sheeta, the eldest among them, froze mid-step, her hands tightening on the pot she carried. "Get inside," she whispered. Quickly. "A storm comes that is not a storm." Before Lindiwe could ask, the horizon shifted. A wall of sand rose from the earth like a living creature, moving with purpose. Not drifting, not swirling. Approaching. The Dustlands had storms, yes, but never ones that stalked. Voices erupted across the camp. People grabbed blankets, pots, children. But the wind hit before they could flee. It slammed into the camp like a giant's palm. Sand exploded upward. Tents tore. Fire pits vanished beneath choking dust. Lindiwe reached for a rock to steady herself, but the wind ripped her backward with brutal force. "Lindiwe," someone screamed, "Sheeta maybe," but the sound dissolved instantly. The storm swallowed her. Inside the storm, the world was not dark, it was glowing. Golden spark dust spun all around her, brushing her skin like hot feathers. Lindiwe gasped, but the air inside the storm tasted strangely warm, almost electric. Sand rushed past her in spirals like living ribbons. She tried to shield her eyes, but the wind grabbed her arms and lifted her feet from the ground. She dangled helplessly, crying out, but the storm smothered every sound she made. Then she saw them. Figures moving through the sand. Not human. Not earthborn. Spirits. They glowed like floating embers, their shapes shifting, sometimes like tall silhouettes, other times like coils of smoke. Their eyes were two shining coals in the middle of swirling dust. Lindiwe's heart hammered painfully, but she could not run. She could not fall. She was suspended in the storm like prey caught in a hawk's shadow. The nearest figure approached, its form flickering like firelight struggling to stay alive. Lindiwe trembled. What are you? Please let me go." The figure tilted its head, listening as though her fear were a language. A warm wind touched her cheek. Then a voice, soft, layered, vibrating with age, breathed, "Child of the cast out." Another spirit appeared beside it, smaller, glowing more brightly. "Child of the broken house." Then a third, darker and heavier, drifted behind her. "Child whose pain shook the sand awake." Lindao's breath shook in her throat. Her feet touched nothing. Her hands grasped nothing. The storm spun and spun, yet she felt cradled, caught by something powerful but deliberate. The spirits circled her until they formed a spiraling ring of light around her. The largest spirit extended a hand made of swirling dust and ember, and gently pressed its palm to Lindao's chest. Warmth erupted through her ribs. Lindao gasped sharply. You know me?" The storm pulsed once. "We felt you the moment he cast you out. We heard your loneliness. Your tears touched our soil." She tried to lower her gaze, but the wind lifted her chin. The smallest spirit floated to her hands. Dust swirled around her palms, slow at first, then fast. The heat increased until she cried out, but the pain never came. Instead, light flooded her skin. Glowing sigils carved themselves into her palms. Spirals shaped like storms, lines shaped like wind, ancient marks older than any kingdom. Lindao sobbed as the light sank beneath her skin and pulsed with her heartbeat. "What is this? What is happening to me?" The spirits rose, their forms stretching tall, like flames reaching. "You were cast out," the wind whispered. The storm's voice deepened, becoming a chorus. "But you are not forgotten." The air grew hotter, humming with something holy. "Become the one who sees what others fear to face." The storm exploded outward. Lindao screamed, not from pain but from the overwhelming flood of sensation. Something broke open inside her mind, as if a heavy blindfold were torn away. The world rushed in. Voices, whispers, memories, secrets, lies, truths, everything. She fell to her knees. Her palms burned with power. Then she heard it. A lie. Not spoken aloud, just lingering in the storm's memory. It rattled like bones in a dry grave. Then she heard an excuse. It crackled like brittle leaves. Then she heard guilt. It throbbed like a shadow trying to hide. She clutched her head. "Stop. Too much, please, too much." But the spirits only floated closer. "You hear what truth sounds like now. You see the weight of secrets. You feel the trembling of the guilty." The storm softened. The spirits drifted backward, bowing like ancient guardians presenting a new heir. Dust rose beneath her feet, lifting her so gently she did not realize she was standing on air. "Rise, Lindao." The dust formed a throne beneath her for only a moment, long enough for her to understand what she had become. Then the storm collapsed. She awoke with her face pressed against warm sand. Her body ached. Her throat burned. But she felt awake. More awake than she had ever been. Sheeta rushed to her, falling to her knees with shaking hands. "You're alive, by all the spirits, you're alive." Lindai looked down at her palms. The sigils pulsed softly beneath her skin like sleeping embers. I saw them," she whispered. "The dust spirits." Sheeta froze. "You what?" "They marked me," Lindai said. "They spoke to me." "What did they say?" Lindai lifted her head. The wind shifted around her like bowing courtiers. Her eyes glowed faintly gold. "They said I must see what others run from." Sheeta stared at her in awe and fear. And as Lindai stood, the dust around her rose, not violently, not angrily, but reverently. And from somewhere deep inside the dustlands came a whisper carried by the wind. "Keep her." Lindai swallowed hard. She did not know what she was becoming. But the world would soon learn. Because the next lie she heard rattled like bones. The next coward she saw crackled like dry leaves. And somewhere far behind her, the guilty were already trembling. Night returned to the village like a slow-moving shadow, stretching itself across rooftops, sliding beneath doors, slipping between the tall clay walls that guarded Baras's compound. The evening winds carried dust again, soft, thin, unsettled. But this dust whispered. It moved with purpose. It carried a name. Lindau. No one spoke it loudly. Not anymore. The first strange event happened on a moonless night, long after the marketplace had emptied and only the restless goats muttered to themselves. A crooked merchant named Musa, known for cheating widows and watering down children's milk, stayed late to count his coins. He sat alone in his storehouse, lantern glowing against the cracked mud walls, his fingers dancing greedily across piles of brass and silver. But then, a footstep. One single footstep in the back room. The room that had been locked since sunset. Musa froze. Another footstep. Soft. Measured. Too calm to be a thief. Musa, a whisper breathed low enough to be wind, but too close to be natural. He turned, heart pounding, lantern shaking in his grasp. The back door still stood shut. The lock remained in place. No one could have entered. But the footsteps moved again. This time they circled him. His breath caught in his throat. He dropped the lantern. It clattered, flames sputtering. Who is there? Show yourself, he cried, voice cracking. The footsteps stopped. Silence pressed heavy against his ears. And then a woman's whisper, not loud, not harsh, just ancient. The dust remembers you. The lantern died. Musa ran into the street barefoot, screaming about a ghost with glowing eyes. No one believed his story, not fully, but the fear in his voice left a mark. It was not the last incident. Barassa's guards were next. 4 weeks after Lindai was cast into the wasteland, Barasa had slept comfortably, certain he had removed the only blemish staining his perfect reputation. But now his guards kept reporting seeing something near the compound fence. Something, or someone. One night, 2 of them stood watch at the eastern gate. They leaned on their spears, tired and bored, whispering jokes about the merchants who owed Barasa coin. Suddenly the wind shifted. Dry dust lifted off the ground and spiraled toward the fence. Storm coming? One guard muttered. No, the other whispered. Storms don't rise from one spot. Because that dust. It wasn't blowing from the sky. It was rising upward from the earth, forming a shape. A silhouette. A woman's silhouette. Her form glowed faintly, like embers stirred in dying fire. Her face was hidden, but her outline flickered with pale, golden light. She stood just beyond the fence, unmoving, staring straight at them. The guards tried to speak, but their voices dried, sticking like sand in their throats. The dust rose higher, circling her like a veil. Then she vanished, just dissolved into the night. The guards dropped their spears and ran. By morning, the story had spread to every corner of the village. Women, and even some elders, began to whisper her name like a prayer. Not out of fear. Out of awe. They whispered it over boiling pots of porridge, over baskets of laundry, over crying infants whose fathers had abandoned them. They whispered it when they saw a neighbor mistreat his wife. They whispered it when a dishonest trader shorted their grain. Lindai. A name both warning and blessing. Some said she had returned from the wasteland carrying spirits. Others said the spirits carried her. But the truth was simpler. The abused and forgotten finally felt seen. And that terrified Barasa more than any ghost story. Rumors became louder. Everywhere he walked, Barasa noticed how people fell silent. They avoided his eyes. They murmured just out of earshot. Children stared at him with a strange, informed fear. The old women, those mothers of mothers, watched him the longest. Their eyes carried the weight of prophecy. One of them muttered as he passed. The girl he cast out walks with dust spirits. Barasa ignored her, but her words crawled under his skin. Another night, he caught 2 of his wives whispering fearfully near the cooking hut. Her footsteps were heard near the well. No, a child saw her shadow moving against the chief's wall. Bless the spirits, she has become something powerful. Barasa snapped. Silence. That name will not be spoken in this house. But his voice betrayed him. His hands trembled as he spoke. Because deep inside he knew. The rumors were not mere superstition. Something was happening. And it all began after the sandstorm. Barasa's fear grew into obsession. He ordered his guards to double their patrols. He instructed the market elders to report any unusual sightings. He even sent spies to the outer villages, convinced someone was hiding Lindai to embarrass him. But the more he tried to silence the name, the louder it returned, whispering through nights, echoing across rooftops, drifting in with the winds. Finally, in a moment of fear-driven anger, he summoned his captains. His voice thundered across the courtyard. Find her. Bring her back. I want the girl captured before these fools tear my leadership apart. The guards exchanged uneasy glances. None dared tell him the truth. They were not sure the girl he spoke of still existed, or if something much greater had taken her place. Barasa didn't care. He wanted control. He wanted obedience. He wanted the world to forget the child he had thrown into the dust. He didn't know the spirits had already chosen her. He didn't know she now walked with forces his spears could not pierce. He didn't know the dust itself bowed to her. He didn't know that by sending men to hunt her, he was calling judgment upon his own head. The village began to fear a name, Lindai. But Barasa, the man who cast her out, feared it most. He feared it because he did not understand what she had become. And because deep in his heart, buried beneath the pride and the power he worshipped, one truth clawed at him. He had created the very thing that was coming for him. Lindai returned to the village without a sound. No footsteps. No announcement. No anger burning in her eyes, only a stillness that felt older than the wind itself. Those who saw her did not call out to her. They simply stepped aside as if something in the air warned them to give her space. Even the livestock grew quiet, sensing the shift. The ground seemed to hum faintly under her feet. Wherever she walked, lamps flickered as though bowing their flames. Shadows stretched unnaturally, bending and reshaping themselves like restless spirits trying to make room for her presence. The air inside homes stirred without reason, lifting curtains, rattling dried herbs, brushing across pots and mats as if invisible hands moved through each room. A woman pounding maize outside her hut felt the wind rise in a sudden spiral, circling her once before drifting toward the direction Lindai walked. The woman whispered, "She has come," though no one had told her who passed. By the time Lindai reached the heart of the village, the dust spirits were already awake, swirling around her ankles, forming faint halos around her hands. They did not howl or rage. They simply moved with her as if she were the center of a slow-breathing storm. She stopped in front of her father's compound. The walls were tall, proud, and built to intimidate. Baresa had designed them to make himself look powerful. He believed a man's greatness was measured by how many he could tower over. But Lindai did not look small before those walls. She lifted a hand and placed her palm, marked with the glowing sigil, against the heavy wooden gate. The wood groaned beneath her touch, crying out like something alive. A crack shot across it with the sharpness of lightning splitting a tree. She did not push. She did not speak. The gate simply cracked because the truth inside the house had nowhere left to hide. Inside the compound, Baresa stumbled from his room, drawn by the echo of breaking wood. He found his guards staring at the gate, too afraid to approach, each clutching his spear like a useless toy. "What is happening?" he shouted. None answered. They only looked at him with a terror he was unaccustomed to seeing in his own men. The crack in the gate widened. A thin line of dust drifted through it, swirling up like smoke. Then another line. And another. Soon dust flowed out of the gate as if the compound itself exhaled, long, weary, and guilty. The dust carried whispers. Faint, broken sounds. Secrets struggling for freedom. The guard stumbled back. Baresa felt his skin crawl. He barked at them, "Open the gate. Stop this foolishness." But when they touched the wood, it trembled violently as though refusing their hands. One guard dropped his spear and ran. Baresa cursed under his breath and turned back toward his home, unaware that the dust spirits were already inside, moving through the rooms, stirring the memories he had buried. The first truth came from the inner courtyard. A gust of dust lifted from under the stones and took shape, forming the outline of a woman's face. His first wife. The one he had mistreated until illness took her voice. Baresa froze as her dust-formed whisper drifted through the air. "Your cruelty built these walls." He staggered back, trembling. Another gust rose from the treasury room, swirling through the window like a thin, angry tornado. It carried the clinking of coins, stolen wealth, the money he had hoarded and hidden while the people starved. The dust hissed. "Your greed poisoned your home." Baresa shouted for the servants, but none came. Most had already fled, running from the strange wind that spoke with the voices of the wronged. Then came the lie he feared most. The dust moved toward him again, this time forming the shape of a child. Small, fragile, with shadows for eyes. The spirit child stood silently at the threshold of his hall. Barasa's breath shuddered. "Not that," he whispered. "Not that one." The child lifted its hand, pointing at him. "Your lies about Lindai tied this house in darkness." The words vibrated through the ground. Lamps shattered. Doors shook. The ceiling groaned. Every secret Baresa had hidden, every betrayal he had hoped would rot quietly, began pushing its way into the open. Dust seeped from the cracks in the floor, revealing the footprints of the people he had wronged. The hall filled with whispers, some accusing, some weeping, some chanting her name. Lindau. Outside the walls, villagers gathered as the dust storm rose over the house. They watched the wind twist and coil, dancing in patterns no natural storm could make. Some held their children close. Some knelt. No one dared move closer. Inside, Baresa clutched his head as memories he had long tried to ignore played before him like ghostly reenactments. His voice became a whimper. "Stop. I said stop." But the dust did not listen. The truth had waited too long. Now it rushed out of every hidden place like a river that had finally burst its dam. From the cracks of the compound walls, whispers escaped and scattered into the village. His cruelty toward his wife, the wealth he stole, the affairs he hid, the men he betrayed, and the lie he told about Lindau to protect his own pride. The villagers covered their mouths, horrified. Some murmured prayers. Some simply shook their heads. Everything he hid was now becoming dust. Dust that blew freely, dust that spoke freely, dust that no longer obeyed him. Baresa watched through the trembling doorway as Lindau slowly approached the cracked gate. Her face was calm. Her eyes were steady. She carried no hatred, only a power that came from seeing the world clearly. The dust spirits swirled behind her like an army of glowing ash. Baresa stepped back, his legs weak. For the first time in his life, the great Baresa, the man who feared nothing, felt the cold touch of truth crawling up his spine. And he realized the thing he feared most had already begun. His house was confronting its sins. And the sins were louder than his voice. Baresa had faced warriors, chiefs, and disputes that turned neighbor against neighbor. He had walked through droughts, storms, and famine with a pride that never cracked. But the moment Lindau stepped through the broken gate of his compound, every ounce of courage he had ever claimed deserted him. She stood framed in the shifting dust, silent, tall, and still as a carved spirit statue. Her eyes glowed faintly with the mark the storm had given her, and the air around her shimmered with heatless light. Behind her, the dust spirits whirled in slow circles, forming a spiraling halo of glowing ash that pulsed like a living heartbeat. Barasa's breath caught. He took one step back. Then another. He did not see his daughter. He saw judgment wearing her face. The walls of the compound trembled as if reacting to her presence. The cracked gate creaked wider without anyone touching it. Dust scraped across the courtyard floor in lines shaped like ancient symbols, warnings, commands, memories. Lindau, Baresa managed, but her name tasted like sand on his tongue. She did not answer. She did not blink. She simply watched him. Her silence hurt more than shouting. More than curses. More than the anger he had expected. Silence was the one thing he could not argue with, overpower, or twist into a lie. The dust spirits drifted closer, their bodies shifting between form and formlessness. Sometimes they looked like silhouettes of people Baresa recognized, old rivals, abandoned wives, workers he had mistreated. Other times they looked like glowing fragments of bone and ash caught in a wind with no source. One spirit swept past Barasa's shoulder, brushing him with a cold so deep he felt it in his ribs. He gasped and stumbled back, clutching his chest. "Witchcraft," he whispered. "This is witchcraft." The dust spirits hummed in response, a low vibration that made the wooden pillars groan and the ground tremble. Lamps hanging outside the rooms flickered violently and died, leaving only the glow of the spirits to light the courtyard. Lindau finally stepped forward. Barasa's throat tightened. Her steps made no sound, yet each one felt like pressure against his lungs. He remembered her as a child. Soft voice. Bare feet on warm soil. A girl who used to laugh as she played in the mango grove. This was not that girl. This was a force. A truth he had spent years outrunning. "Speak," Baresa demanded, though his voice shook. "If you came to accuse me, say it. Say something." Still Lindau said nothing. Her silence expanded, filling every corner of the compound until the air seemed too thick to breathe. Barasa's knees weakened, and he gripped a pillar to steady himself. Behind her, the dust spirits rose higher, swirling into a storm-like column, glowing embers suspended in a form that looked like a tower of ancestors. Their whispers filled the courtyard. Not words yet. Just breath. Old breath. Heavy breath. Baresa felt their presence like cold fingers pressing against his skull. Finally Lindau lifted her head. The markings on her palms glowed faintly, as if remembering the storm that had awakened them. She took another step, and the ground cracked beneath her foot. That was when Baresa broke. "I am your father," he blurted, desperate. "You owe me respect." Lindau's gaze sharpened, and the dust spirits surged with a sudden, violent pulse. Baresa flinched, his words dying in his throat. Her voice when it came was soft, but the courtyard shook with it. "You cast me out to protect your power." The dust spirits echoed her words, repeating the phrase in dozens of layered whispers. The ground vibrated with their syllables. Barasa's hands trembled uncontrollably. Lindau continued, "Now I return to show you how weak it truly was." A gust of dust shot upward like a pillar of fire. The walls groaned as though ready to collapse. Baresa shielded his face against the wind, fear slashing through him. He looked at her again, truly looked, and what stared back was not hate, nor vengeance, nor grief. It was certainty. A certainty older than his lies. A certainty stronger than his pride. A a certainty that no father's authority could overpower. The dust spirits drifted around her like an army awaiting her command. Barisa finally understood. He had not been afraid of losing control when he banished her. He had been afraid of what she would become once she realized he could not control her at all. And now she stood before him, not as his daughter, not as an outcast, but as the truth he could no longer outrun. The first memory rose from the ground like a thin ribbon of dust, soft, almost gentle, drifting upward in a lazy spiral. Barisa barely noticed it at first. But then more spirals followed, rising from every corner of the courtyard, from the cracks in the walls, from beneath the floor he once walked on with pride. The dust twisted into shapes, faces, hands, shadows, echoes of voices he thought he had buried forever. His household gathered at the entrance, drawn by the unnatural wind. Servants, guards, his new wife, his sons, all frozen, watching in silent horror as the air thickened with the ghosts of truth. One spiral twisted itself into the shape of a kneeling woman, her head bowed. Barisa recognized the outline. His first wife, Lindau's mother. The dust memory replayed itself, showing her weeping as he argued with her, her voice cracking under his accusations, his cruel words slicing the air. Another spiral showed him accepting stolen cattle he had claimed were lost in a raid. Another, meeting secretly with a rival's wife, promising protection. Another, ordering a poor family thrown off his land because they dared to question him. The dust did not ask for permission. It simply revealed. Barisa stumbled back, shaking his head violently. No, stop. Stop this. But the memories only grew thicker, rising like a storm around him. The dust twisters spun faster, merging into a cyclone of living truth. His servants backed away. His sons turned pale. His new wife covered her mouth and whispered a trembling prayer. The storm tightened around Barisa. He ran. He bolted for the doorway, for the street, for anywhere the dust couldn't follow, but the earth beneath him rippled like a living thing. Dust surged up from the ground and wrapped around his legs like shackles, dragging him down to his knees. He clawed at the earth, his fingernails filling with grit. Panic ripped through him, raw and wild. Lindau, he screamed. Her name tore from his throat like a plea, a cry for mercy. Not spoken as a father. Not spoken with authority. But as a drowning man gasping for air. Lindau, help me. Help me. She did not move. She did not speak. She simply watched him, the dust spirits swirling silently behind her. The twisters closed in, now showing his darkest memory, one he had never spoken of. The night he banished Lindau. Not just the moment he ordered her out, but the reason behind it. His fear. His shame. His cowardice. He had not thrown her away because she was a curse, as he told the village, nor because she was weak, as he told himself. He banished her because she resembled her mother's strength. She questioned him with the same eyes. And he could not bear to face what those eyes saw. The village had never known that truth. But now the dust carried it into the wind for all to witness. Barisa screamed again, this time choked by sobs. Please? I am your father, show mercy. A deep hum filled the air, low, thunderous, resonant. The dust spirits circled him in a wide ring, their glowing forms rising higher, merging with the storm above. The courtyard shook violently, tiles splitting apart, beams creaking as though bearing the weight of centuries. The voices came from everywhere at once. Old voices, echoing voices, countless voices layered into one. Your house falls not because she left, the spirits declared, their words roaring like wind through stone, but because you abandoned truth. Barasa's eyes widened as the ground beneath him caved. Cracks spiderwebbed across the courtyard floor. Walls trembled. The gate broke entirely. The room where he once sat in power buckled inward as though bowing to judgment. With a deafening rumble, the compound began to collapse. The household fled, scattering into the street as the legacy Barisa built. His pride, his wealth, his authority, crumbled into dust and debris. Roof beams snapped like bones. Clay walls exploded outward in clouds of earth. Barisa reached out toward Lindau one last time, but the dust pulled him back, dragging him into the center of the collapse. He screamed once more, his voice breaking into silence as the ground swallowed him. Then the dust settled. Slowly, softly. The wind calmed. The spirits drifted around Lindau in quiet circles, like guardians completing their task. The compound lay in ruins, nothing but broken clay, shattered wood, and memories freed at last. The dynasty Barisa dreamed of, fought for, lied for, destroyed for, ended in a single night. Not by war. Not by a rival. not by misfortune, but by the truth he spent a lifetime burying, rising from the dust to claim what was always owed. The sun rose over the ruins of Barasa's compound like a slow, deliberate promise. Dust hung in the air, settling over broken walls and splintered beams, but it no longer carried accusation or fear. Instead, it hummed softly with the memory of justice delivered and truth revealed. Lindai walked among the rubble, her bare feet pressing lightly into the earth, and for the first time in years she smiled. She began to rebuild, not with clay and timber to restore her father's dynasty, but with purpose and care to shelter those who had been abandoned, oppressed, or silenced. Orphans with hollow eyes and mothers whose husbands had left them in debt or despair came to her. Widows carrying grief as if it were a weight tied to their necks arrived quietly, expecting judgment but finding guidance. Broken men and women who had lived in fear now whispered the name she had earned. The Dust Keeper. It was not a title she asked for. It was not a crown she wore. It was a name that carried power because of her deeds, the quiet yet relentless force of truth she embodied. Children of the village ran to her, laughing, their fears softened by her presence. They learned from her how to speak their truths, how to let the wind carry their voices without fear, how to turn whispers into the strength of action. Even the elders who had once laughed at her exile, bowed their heads in reverence. She did not wield authority through intimidation or cruelty, but through understanding that justice and compassion could coexist in the same hand. Her eyes, once full of anger and hurt, now carried wisdom forged in the fires of survival and tempered by the lessons of the dust spirits. Parents began to warn their children when mischief or cruelty stirred. Do not become cruel, or the Dust Keeper will hear your name. It was said not as a threat alone, but as a reminder. Every action, every injustice, every lie could be seen, carried, and remembered. Lindai's presence in the village became a living testament to balance and accountability. Houses were rebuilt around her refuge, but never around her name. Her house was the people. Her walls were the hope of those she protected. She walked through the marketplace, the dusty paths of the village, the quiet corners of homes she helped restore. Every eye she met held recognition, not for her as a child, not for her as the daughter of Baresa, but for the force she had become. Even in the dark hours, when the wind carried the old dust across the land, villagers spoke her name in hushed awe, a prayer for safety, a reminder of justice. And Lindai kept walking, quietly, humbly, with the certainty of someone who had seen the worst and survived. Behind her, the dust spirits lingered, invisible yet present, swirling around the edges of every path she took. They were her allies, her witnesses, her guardians. They had been with her since the night the storm rose, and they would remain as long as injustice tried to root itself in the hearts of men. In time the story spread beyond the village. Travelers spoke of the girl the chief had cast out, the one who returned not for revenge but to see truth restored. They spoke of the Dust Keeper who walked with spirits, whose name was spoken to teach respect and caution. The legacy of fear Baresa had built crumbled into history, while the legacy of Lindai, the girl who had been exiled, betrayed, and made to disappear into the dustlands, grew like a seed carried by the wind, strong and enduring. And so the people remembered, and the wind carried her name across valleys, over rivers, and through the mountains. He banished her from his house, but she became the name his house feared, and the name the world learned to respect.